Like all doctors in the 60s, I was aware of the dangers of heroin, but totally ignorant of cannabis. Then in 1966, I had an opportunity to study heroin addiction. I reasoned that since heroin is the ultimate sedative and produced a feeling of security and well-being, then in order to experiment with it so often as to become addicted, there must be a profound underlying sense of insecurity. It was therefore no use attempting withdrawal until those underlying anxieties had been identified and resolved. This no-nonsense approach was widely acclaimed by the addict community that in those days, before the creation of the black market in 1968, only numbered about 2,000 people. This acclaim led to a spirited young patient to hide a large joint on my desk when my back was turned. Then as now, cannabis was illegal. But in those days, the law had both a spirit and a letter. By smoking the joint, I was infringing the letter of the law, but not its spirit. I found that it produced a warm, contented glow, similar to hypnosis, that I had experienced on a postgraduate course a couple of years previously. This immediately put me on my guard. I remembered the television program in the 1950s that had first aroused my interest in hypnosis. In it, two eminent psychiatrists demonstrated that it was possible to use hypnotic suggestion to make people go against their better nature by giving them a plausible reason for doing so. In the program, a subject whose better nature caused him to refuse to smash a vase after a suggestion to do so, happily obliged when it was suggested that the vase be smashed because it was cracked. It was therefore clear that cannabis could be abused in a very subtle way, and that further investigation was necessary. Since subversive abuse would be facilitated by its illegal status, in 1967 I joined those calling for legalization. For drugs to affect people, there must be receptors for them in the body. If there are receptors for them in the body, then there must be similar substances in the body that use them for normal everyday activities. Endogenous opiates and cannabinoids, together with the receptors, have since been identified. The difference between these naturally occurring substances and drugs taken recreationally is that ingested drugs flood the body indiscriminately rather than acting at precise nerve endings. Adrenaline is a third psychoactive substance in the body. It has psychological as well as physical effects, causing apprehension, anxiety, or panic fear. The everyday part played by these three endogenous psychoactive substances becomes easier to understand if one realizes that people have two personalities. One is insecure and anxious when an individual feels threatened, and the other is secure and relaxed when an individual feels safe and secure. And this will be mediated by endogenous opiates. The effect of cannabinoids is less clear until one recalls the phenomenon of being carried away by a film, absorbed by a good book, or when one daydreams or meditates. These are similar to the effects of smoking cannabis. Anyone who has enjoyed a good book or film has therefore experienced cannabis intoxication without realizing it. But the overall effect is to dissociate the mind from the body. Metaphysically, it is as if the cannabinoids link the subjective reality of thoughts, feelings, and the infinity of inner space to the objective reality of the outside world. Smoking cannabis creates a warm, contented glow in most people. Those preoccupied by the swirl of events say the drug has no effect. In fact, those with severe anxiety can suffer the horror of panic attacks. In the final analysis, the action of cannabis depends on the ambient balance of the mind. It became apparent that all substances that affect the balance of the mind fall into one of three groups, according to whether they resemble adrenaline, opiate, or cannabis in their effect. The subtle spectrum of light we can see is composed of only three primary colours: red, green, and blue. Perhaps one day science will demonstrate that the subtle spectrum of feelings we can feel is mediated by these three types of psychoactive substance in the body. However, just as the intensity of colours depends on the brightness of the light, so the intensity of emotions depends on the level of arousal. Substances such as cocaine and amphetamine stimulate the release of noradrenaline and increase the level of arousal. People feel more alert and self-confident, as if they're already the sort of people they would like to be. It is the dissociated state of mind produced by cannabinoids that responds to hypnosis. The mind becomes open to suggestions that are readily acceptable with plausible reasons for doing so. It is not generally realized that throughout history, this property of cannabis and cannabinoids in the body has been the object of widespread clandestine abuse. I'll conclude with three examples. As Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda chief, observed in the 1930s, good propaganda should be entertaining. Cannabinoids in the body have allowed individuals to be carried away by Hollywood films for many decades now. In most films, people drive cars, and owning one has become a universal dream. However, for most people, cars are totally unnecessary. For example, during the war, when petrol was rationed, people managed perfectly well with trains, buses and bikes, many travelling many miles to work. Even district nurses did their rounds on a bicycle. But after the war, more and more people acquired cars. Gradually, bus services that used to run from early morning to late in the evening at frequent intervals became uneconomic and were withdrawn. Children, the elderly and the poor had to wait ages for the next bus during the day and lost the freedom to travel anywhere in the evening. Moreover, cars are fueled by a finite resource. What is selfishly burnt today is denied future generations. The personal car is the single greatest polluter and the emissions from 1 billion vehicles are now a global problem. Driving is the most air-polluting activity for the average person. Cannabis itself has been abused politically by to brainwash the post-war generation with the notion of equality. Although everyone is equal in that everyone needs food and shelter, they are far from equal in the eyes of each other. Everyone is superior to others in some ways, and equal or inferior in others. This is because human beings are primates like chimpanzees. The innate structure of primate society is hierarchical. Human beings, with their complex brains, have complex hierarchies. Not only are there specialists in every area of human activity, those specialists vary in their mastery of their specialties and in the freedom and privileges they need to practice them. Then there's the acknowledgement of the best, a task that is too complex for a vote and traditionally accomplished by acclaim. For example, the Charles Darwins of the world are acclaimed, not elected. It is not equality, but quiet acclaim of their very existence that each and every individual craves. Civilization itself depends on the recognition and promotion of teams of talented and privileged elites.